A chill shot up my spine as soon as I saw the exterior of Lizzie's. One of those fucking bastards was holding up that sign in the lot. The narrator, Bishop, spoke, and for a terrifying instant, I thought he was standing right next to me. But I was safe at home. It was V who was in danger, and there was a good chance that if I didn't find the clues she had already stumbled across, the same fate would await her. I could only hope she hadn't already met it. Just the thought of it was enough to make my stomach churn, but something else was creeping over me. A terrible feeling of dread unlike any I'd ever felt before. Deep down, in what my abuelo had said was my soul, I understood what it was. Even with the sensory feed off, I could vividly remember how good they had made me feel. Sure, some of that was because of the ice they'd forced upon me, but there was more to it than that. There was an enormous echo just beneath the surface of the recording. Subconsciously, I had known about it when I watched it in my den, but I had stubbornly refused to acknowledge its existence. But it was clear to me now. It was like someone had tossed a stone into a calm lake, only I hadn't seen where it had landed and could only see the ripples spreading their way out. All I had to do was trace them back to their origin. I was grounded on the shore, laying on the couch in my apartment. The first ripple reached me. I was back in my den, rubbing my fingers over the fabric of my jeans as I watched myself being fucked. Another ripple, and now I was the one being fucked on the cold cement floor. But much further out, so far away that it could barely be seen, I saw the last ripple emanating from where the stone had dropped. There I was, 12 years old, with my face buried between Cindy's legs for the first time. The smell of fresh paella hung heavily in the air. My abuelos were sitting right outside my bedroom, and my lips were curled in disgust as I awkwardly ate her out. A sob escaped my lips as my assault played out just as I remembered it, but it wasn't because of what they were doing to me. It wasn't even because of what she had done to me. It was because it wasn't my fault. I'd spent most of my life convincing myself I somehow deserved what Cindy had done. After all, what kind of child could feel such forbidden things if they weren't already rotten to the core, if they weren't a monster to begin with? And ever since that fateful day when she had walked up to me and asked me to play with her, I'd made so many mistakes and paid plenty of times over for them. I still was, but this was one mistake I refused to carry the burden for any longer. Cindy had been the rock that had dropped into my life. It wasn't my fault. I closed my eyes, ignoring what was happening and focusing on steadying my breathing. When I opened them, I was greeted with the sight of me getting kicked out of the back of the van. Cursing under my breath, I paused the recording. I could do this. I was strong enough. With a swipe of my hand, the virtue rewound before my eyes, coming to a stop at an obscene image of myself hoisted into the air, being railed from every direction. Ignoring it, I kept going, working my way back to the first scene. There wasn't any point in watching the clips they'd scrolled outside of Lizzie's or in the garage. I knew those places. They were right out in the open, and at this time of day there would be plenty of people around. As sick as they were, they wouldn't be so brazen as to hang out in the open like that. But where? Think. Observe your surroundings. Try to find the same clues V found. I stared at the image before me. My POV was being forced toward the floor, offering up nothing of use. Already aware of what was happening behind me, I scrolled forward and quickly paused when I finally looked up. Between the mess of hands groping me from every angle, I spotted a long row of windows running alongside the top of the building. It had to be some kind of warehouse, which narrowed it down to only about 1 million buildings scattered all across Night City. Fuck, the entire waterfront district was basically one enormous amalgamation of thousands of cookie-cutter-style complexes. There was some light pouring through them, but it wasn't enough to have anything to go on. Pressing on, I watched the scene unfold exactly as I remembered. At least I didn't feel it this time, though the phantom sensation of their cocks still plagued me. I occasionally stopped whenever my POV shifted toward my surroundings, trying to search for some clue, but there was nothing to be found. No boxes or equipment to ID, no signs plastered on the walls that might tell me where I was, nothing. What the fuck had V seen that I was missing? Twice, I scanned through my first rape scene, and both times I came up empty. Huffing in frustration, I scrolled past the second interlude. Even though I knew what awaited me in the next scene, it was still a shock to see it play out. It had been different at Lizzie's when I hadn't known it was me. But my surprise didn't last long. Immediately, I noticed my angle had changed. They must have repositioned me at some point, as I now had a better view of the windows. There was something out there, a shape, but it kept getting obscured by bodies. I ignored their taunts, the sounds of flesh clapping together, their laughter, patiently waiting to catch a clear glimpse of it. I was about to give up when a hand gripped my hair and yanked my face away from the cock in my mouth. There! I froze the recording, carefully rewinding frame by frame and ignoring everything else until finally, in between a pair of leering grins, I saw it. No wonder I hadn't noticed it before. If I had blinked at the wrong time, I would have missed it. The logo was fuzzy and out of focus from how fast my head had been jerked back, but I'd seen its familiar color and outline enough times to recognize it immediately. BD Shack. My heart sank in my chest. There were dozens of the outlet stores scattered across the city, mostly on the south and east sides. Shit, Little China alone probably had close to 50 locations dotting along the narrow alleyways. There was no way I would ever find the exact one from just a few blurry frames. And neither could V. She had said she knew where they were. So what had tipped her off? The answer had to be here, somewhere. But there was only one place left to look. I gulped and noticed how sweaty my palms were becoming. It was only a recording. This had already happened to me, been burned into my memories. And if I didn't find V, it would happen to her too. I swiped my finger through the air, fast-forwarding through the third interlude until I was greeted with the most horrific sight of my life. Me. Something hot rolled down my cheek as I watched the scene unfold just as it had before. It took every ounce of strength I had to keep my eyes focused on my surroundings rather than what was happening to me as I looked up at the scroller with a dazed smile on my face and said, "Geez." It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. But my breath hitched in my throat when the scene ended and switched to the one in the van. That couldn't be it. I'd found nothing. I'd seen or heard nothing. There had to be something more, something I missed. I went back and watched it a second time, then a third. By the fourth viewing, I finally paused it midway through the scene. There was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Why couldn't I see what she saw?
Because you don't truly know her, you fucking gonk. No matter how much you try to lie to me by saying it wasn't your fault and all that bullshit, you know I'm right. You were never in her head, and you never will be.
There I was, kneeling on the floor, skin covered in grime, spit, and cum. My hair was a matted mess too. Was that the old Judy who'd been ripped open right down to the core, or the new one? The answer screamed out at me, joining in perfect solidarity the eruption of rage that burst from my throat. I gripped the wreath and nearly yanked it off my head, but stopped myself, heaving for breath. It didn't matter if it was the old Judy or the new one. Didn't even matter if it had simply been me all along. I would watch myself get violated in the most profane ways imaginable 1,000 times if it meant finding out where V had gone. I didn't think twice, didn't even bother to rewind it, as I swiped my finger upward, spiking the sensory feed to its highest limit. As soon as I pressed play, I was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of delicious sensations. An intense heat burned between my legs, and I knew I was already on the verge of coming. On the couch, I could feel myself growing wet again. Blood rushed through my veins, roaring in my ears. Was that from the ice which heightened the pleasure every nerve in my body was sending to my brain? Or was it because even now, knowing everything that had happened to me, I still couldn't stop myself from getting turned on? Did it even fucking matter anymore? No, it didn't. So I had enjoyed it. So what? It was still something I never would have chosen to have had done to me, and it sure as fuck wasn't my fault. I refused to feel ashamed about this, even when that acrid taste flooded into my mouth. It hadn't been as bitter as I had expected it to be. If anything, it had tasted salty, almost like the ocean. I gasped and pulled the wreath off of my head. A bead of sweat rolled down my temple as I shifted on the couch. Sure enough, the fabric of my shorts had turned damp. The rest of my senses were a scrambled mess as I tried to get my bearings, fingers protesting as I forced them open and fumbled about until they closed around the familiar outline of my hollow. The ocean. The smell of salt had been in the air. I remembered that. And before I had seen the logo, there had been a vague hint of city light pouring in through the windows. I'd been on the west side of the city near the ocean. How many BD shacks could there be along the coastline? I ignored the sharp pang that shot across my temples as I focused on the screen and brought up the addresses of every BD shack in Night City. Amidst the plethora of dots that littered the map, one in particular seemed to be staring back at me. Sure enough, it was buried in an industrial complex near the coast, and there wasn't another one to be found for miles. That had to be it. I was about to try calling V again when my hollow buzzed and her avatar reappeared on the screen. Thank fuck, she was all right. V, I answered. Jesus, I was worried sick about you. Listen, I want you—
Hey there, sweetie.
My jaw dropped to the ground, and the room began to spin so violently that I had to grip the edge of the sofa to keep myself from tumbling over. The deep voice that came from the speaker was the same one I'd heard just a few moments earlier, the same one that still triggered a confusing throbbing between my legs. Bishop. I was too stunned to speak. It was him. And he was calling me from V's hollow, which meant— My face twisted in horror.
You there, sweetie? I know it's been a while, but I gotta say, I was hoping for a warmer welcome than this. Well, look who found their voice, Bishop gloated. So, I'm glad to hear your throat's feeling better after how rough I was.
I wanted to hang up, curl into a ball, and cry my eyes out. It was worse than the nightmares, worse than the XBD. It was real, and it was happening all over again. I'd failed. I was too late. And now— Where is she? I croaked. I didn't want to know. Even though he didn't have the video on and all I saw was V's avatar on the screen, I could still imagine his lips curling back to reveal that hideous smile of his. He'd flashed it at me the whole time. Was V looking at it right now? Oh God, no.
Where's who? He asked innocently. Oh, you mean your precious little bitch output. Don't worry, sweetie. We've been taking good care of V for you.
Don't you fucking touch her, I screamed.
Bishop laughed. Now, don't you go getting that throat of yours all raw again so soon. I said we've been taking good care of her. What, you don't believe me? Calling me a fucking liar? Tell you what, how about I prove to you that I'm a man of my word? I hope you don't mind if we helped her get a little more comfortable, since she certainly did.
I'd broken out into a cold sweat and my eyes were darting all over the place, even though I couldn't focus on a damn thing when my hollow buzzed again. He'd sent a single file, a picture. I didn't want to look. I was terrified of what I would see, but I couldn't stop myself. I was just as powerless as I'd been before. I gasped in horror as the picture loaded on my screen. V had been stripped down to nothing more than her bra and underwear. Her wrists and ankles were cuffed to the same chair I had been in. Surrounding her were the same grinning faces that had haunted my nightmares for months, lewdly rubbing the bulges between their legs. Her eyes shimmered with a shocking blend of fear and desperation I had never seen before. It was horrific, agonizing, so much so that tears were already threatening to spill from my eyes. And when I saw what they had done to her mouth, I couldn't restrain the sobs that finally escaped from my lips. She was biting down on a bright pink ball gag that perfectly matched the color of her hair. A thin trail of saliva ran down her chin and had spilled onto her chest. God damn them. She already had to be terrified out of her fucking mind, and they'd covered her mouth. Tears poured down my cheeks. It was too awful to look at, but I couldn't avert my eyes. How could I look away when I had failed her so completely? "You see," Bishop called out, "I told you before that I was a man of my word, that I'd fuck you both soon. Did you really think I wasn't going to?" I didn't feel it coming. I'd been so horrified by what was happening that the spray of vomit which erupted from my mouth caught me completely by surprise. The table and sofa were coated in a hot, sticky mess before I managed to duck my head and finish retching onto the floor. When I finally stopped and could gasp for breath, I heard him laughing at me, raising goosebumps along my skin. "Don't hurt her," I sputtered, not bothering to wipe any of the puke off my chin. "You can have me, just—"
"Oh, I'm gonna have you," Bishop barked. "That's not even up for debate. And while I'm at it, I'll tell you this. I'm gonna have her too, though how I do it is gonna be up to you."
Have her too? No. I couldn't let this happen to her. I knew there was little hope in begging with these soon-to-be rapists, but I had to try. "Please, don't do this to her," I pleaded. "Please don't. I'll do anything you want, anything. Just leave her alone." There was a pause at the other end. Had I been wrong? Was he actually considering it? I don't care how humiliating it was or what would happen to me if he agreed. If it meant sparing V this awful fate, I wouldn't think twice.
"Sorry about that," Bishop finally said. "Your output got a little flustered when she saw how hard you were making me. Gotta admit, I was awfully tempted to give her a sneak peek, but I'm a patient man, even though I've got my limits like everyone else. You got 20 minutes to get that sweet ass of yours to the corner of Pinewood and Longshore. No hollow, no guns, no tricks. And don't even waste your time calling the badges. They're all too busy enjoying their free copies of Lizzie's Secret to bother throwing a glance your way. But you better hurry, seeing as how we're gonna start the party without you if you're not there."
20 minutes? That would barely give me enough time to get there. My mind raced, desperate for anything I could think of to slow things down or buy myself more time. And just like when I'd woken up strapped to the same chair V was in now, I couldn't think of a thing. As much as I hated to admit it, I didn't doubt for 1 second what Bishop had said about the badges. I had tried to convince V there were still a few good ones out there, but one could never tell. Maybe I could try to hide one of V's guns in my jeans. I shook the thought from my head. They had thought this through and would be sure to search me as soon as I showed up. Hell, that was why they were having me go to a pickup location, so they could keep an eye out for anyone who might be tailing me. There was nothing I could do, and yet I tried one last time. "Wait, if you let her go—"
"Oh, and one last thing," Bishop interrupted, seemingly growing bored with the conversation. "Brush your teeth before you leave. It sounded like you had a little moment when you found out what's gonna happen to both of you. You know how much that turns me on. Want you all nice and fresh for us. 19 minutes.
Wait!" The call abruptly ended. I leapt to my feet, nearly slipping on a puddle of vomit, and raced toward the bathroom. I could barely keep my hand steady as I splayed a dab of toothpaste on my toothbrush. This bastard was actually making me wash my mouth out so he could use it all over again. I steadied myself against the sink as I went to work, trying to think of something I could do, even as my bladder threatened to release itself. What could I do? No badges, no weapons, no hollow, no V. In a city of millions, I was completely alone. Or was I? Rita. She'd offered to help me once before, and no matter what had gone down between Susie and me, I was still a Mox. That meant something to her and the others. They would come running to my aid. All I had to do was call her and explain what was happening. I spat into the sink and tossed my toothbrush aside, not hearing it clatter to the floor as I raced back to the sofa. Probably only 18 minutes now. Had to hurry. Heart pounding, I fumbled with my hollow before finally getting a grip on it. I was rushing back through the kitchen, searching for my keys while I pulled up Rita's number. When I froze, I couldn't trust her. Rita's heart was in the right place, but I'd seen too much of myself in her to know she wasn't reliable. At this time of day, she would probably be passed out on the couch with a hypo in her hand, and even if she wasn't, something told me that if I got her involved, things would go south. The Mocs didn't talk their way out of problems, and patience wasn't in their vocabulary. Would a couple of them find their way to us before the others arrived and simply rush inside, guns blazing? No. Things would only get worse if I pulled Rita into this whole fucking mess. Blood, probably ours, would be spilled. It was all the Mocs knew how to do. Resigning to my fate, I swiped my keys off the counter. It didn't feel real. That in a few short minutes I'd find myself right back in their clutches and both of us would have to endure the unendurable. But every step I took brought with it an impending sense of doom until I finally stopped at the door. I couldn't blindly surrender to this. They would rape us both, and this time they certainly wouldn't let us go. They had only cut me loose before to bait V, and now that they had her, what value would there be in setting us free afterward? No, I had to put up a fight. A fight? My eyes snapped open. I turned and bolted into the storage room, aware that the clock was ticking and I probably only had 17 minutes left. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I tore through the piles of boxes, sending monitors and equipment crashing to the ground as I continued my frantic search. I was on the verge of panic when I finally caught sight of what I was looking for. I held up one of the doll chips, examining it. They were still loaded with the combat mod I'd written years earlier for my first failed attempt to take down clowns. The program was simple, yet effective, capable of turning its occupant into a lethal combat expert if threatened. It was an act of pure desperation. There would still be at least 8 of those fuckers waiting for me, certainly armed to the teeth, but that didn't stop me from slotting the chip into the port near my temple. My system acknowledged its presence and began loading the software into my cyber deck. When it was finished, I paused and waited for some sign that it was working. But there was none, and I didn't feel any differently. 16 minutes. Shit! I couldn't wait any longer. It would take every second I had left to get there in time, and even then I would need to run the lights. But nothing would stop me from getting there. And if the chip turned out to be a pathetic gambit that would only earn me the lion's share of their abuse, I'd at least entrusted myself with a fighting chance. It seemed to be all I could hope for. Each second ticked away in my head as I dashed out the door and down the fire escape, nearly tripping over my own feet several times before I threw open the door to my van. I had to be quite the sight, still wearing the same raggedy t-shirt and shorts I'd slept in. I realized as I fired up the engine and tore out of the lot that I was still clutching my hollow, and Bishop had made it clear that was a big no-no. As soon as I careened around the corner, I rolled down the window, intending to throw away the last link I had to the outside world when I stopped myself. River. I didn't know what to make of the former detective. He'd been a badge, which meant I shouldn't have trusted a word out of his mouth, and his friends on the force hadn't done a damn thing with the information I'd given them. If they had, we wouldn't be in this position in the first place. But he had helped us and hadn't asked for anything in return. He seemed good-natured when I told him everything that had happened to me, and he'd been honest in telling me there probably wasn't much that could be done about it. More than anything, though, V trusted him. That was enough for me. After cutting through a red light and earning myself an angry honk from the car I'd nearly clipped, I called him and was surprised when his face appeared on my HUD just a few seconds later. Judy, is that you? I realized that even though I'd heard his name in passing for months, I had even talked to him just a couple days earlier, that I'd never actually seen River until now. He was only visible from the chest up, but judging from how the sheepskin coat he wore flared over his broad shoulders and the thick veins running alongside his neck, he'd clearly put in more than his fair share of time at the gym. A fine layer of stubble lined his scalp, and even though a large implant covered one of his eyes, there was still an unmistakable expression of concern in the other.
Judy? You there?
Yeah, I replied, spinning the wheel to swerve around the car in front of me. They got V. The same fuckers who raped me and grabbed her, and I know, River interrupted, his tone mixed with both urgency and a firm sense of control.
She called me when she was out there.
My jaw dropped. V had called River? Why? That didn't make any sense. I was the one calling him, not V. She had stormed out of the apartment intent on exacting vengeance. There wouldn't have been any reason for her to call him unless... Had she changed her mind? She called you?
Yes, River exclaimed. Said she knew where the Death Head ring was operating out of. She wanted me to send in the cavalry before she did something stupid. I've been trying to lock up the last of those fuckers for years, even after I left the force. She was about to give me the address when they grabbed her.
Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes as I squeezed them shut. She had listened to me and changed her mind at the last second. But more than that, she had respected my choice to not get our hands coated in blood and to put all of this behind us so we could look forward again. And now, that single moment of compassion would end up costing her everything. Costing us everything. Fuck! I slammed my fist against the wheel. River, I only got a few minutes left before I'm supposed to meet them at the corner of Pinewood and Longshore. If I don't show, they're gonna do the same thing to her that they did to me. My voice choked in my throat.
God damn it,
River cursed, pausing to think. I could tell he was already on the road, behind the wheel of what I guessed was a pickup truck. My heart sank when he shook his head.
That's not enough time for me to get out there and help you. Come on, River, think.
Help me? I didn't want him to help me. V was the one who'd been stripped down and gagged, who'd been castrated, humiliated, and forced to be taunted and jeered at by a group of sadistic rapists who undoubtedly had planned the most depraved and sickening acts they could possibly think to inflict upon us. Christ, if they were already starting. No, it was too unbearable to think about, and all it would do was make me puke again. Would probably get in an accident too, and I definitely didn't want to think about what would happen to her if I didn't show up on time. I had to stay strong. I think I know where they're going to be taking me, I said. I looked at the XBD they scrolled. It's got to be some kind of warehouse near the coast. Place smelled like the ocean, and there's a BD shack right across from it. If you can grab the address, it should be right there. River's eyes lit up.
BD shack near the coast. Got it.
I watched out of the corner of my eye as River made a sharp turn. It was disorienting, and I had to quickly turn my attention back to the road. I turned onto Pinewood. Longshore was only a mile or so ahead. River looked back at me.
All right, listen. I'm on my way there now, and I'm going to call a few badges who I know I can trust. But even with the address of the BD shack, it's going to be hard trying to pinpoint exactly where.
I nodded, understanding his meaning. Jesus, my heart was really pounding. I'll stall as long as I can.
Good. They won't let you keep that hollow.
I know. I tried to force a smile onto my lips as I began rolling down the window. Gonna pitch it out the window as soon as I hang up. Fuck. Wish I wasn't this fucking jittery. I was on the verge of panic. Sweaty palms, chattering teeth, even a hint of stars swimming at the edges of my vision. If only I could go back in time to grab onto her and never let go. To go back to when I was 12 years old and scream at myself to run inside and slam the door shut behind me before it was too late. But I couldn't. Forward was the only way. I knew that now, and no matter what was about to happen to us, we would be together. I drew a shaky breath, trying to steel myself. I'm almost there. River leaned forward, bringing his face close to the screen.
Listen, Judy. Help is on the way, and I will find you. Just slow him down and buy me as much time as you can. Make noise, do anything you can that won't get either of you hurt.
I managed a nod before my chin began to tremble once more. My cheeks burned with shame. I'm fucking scared, River.
I know you are, River said soothingly. Only a gonk wouldn't be, and V told me enough good things about you to know you ain't no gonk. Hang in there and remember, V's a fighter. You can trust her to watch out for you.
Yes, I could. I never should have doubted that. I do trust her. River nodded and hung up. A couple of blocks ahead, I saw a white van parked near the curb. With the flick of my wrist, I sent my holo flying out the window. I was afraid. I had been afraid for so long that I'd become numb to it, and after years of clinging to that fear like a warm jacket, the events of the last few months had finally seen it torn away from me, leaving me bare. My disaster of a life had been completely upended. Every lie had collapsed under the weight of themselves, and new scars had formed, marks I would carry with me for the rest of however much longer I had left to live. I'd crossed every limit I'd ever thought impossible to traverse. I stared into the void, and as strong as I was, I knew I would have broken into a million pieces if it hadn't been for V. She had been my sole lifeline, and as I approached the van and began to slow down, I resolved myself to tell her what I should have said right from the very beginning. I trust you, V.